we're starting on acrylic techniques. Basically, this is where we're learning basic painting techniques outside of just plain watercolor. Watercolor is kind of its own little beast because it is very transparent. Painting with acrylic can be really different compared to painting with watercolor. Acrylic can go multiple ways. It can either be really opaque and really thick, or you can thin it down to where it's transparent like watercolor. My suggestion for beginning students is working with this apple barrel. I got this from Walmart for $5. Gives you basically a good set of color, except for a skin tone. You can just add that, because most of these are also 50 cents individually. These are fluid acrylics, meaning they're watered down a little bit compared to heavy body acrylics, which are the ones that come in tubes. The ones that come in tubes are concentrate. You only need little bits of those if you've got those at home. So I'm gonna open this up. So I've turned to my acrylic techniques page in my sketchbook, and I've got some basic tools laid out here for everything. This page, hold on one sec. Gotta get the plastic off of the paint. These are basic tools. You don't necessarily need everything here. You do, in fact, need paint brushes, water, and a palette, and a paper towel, but you'll see some things here I have that are a little odd, such as these. These are called palette knives. These are plastic ones. They're very cheap. They only cost a couple dollars. They're helpful if you want to keep going with painting, but not exactly necessary. You could use any kind of utensils, like this fork here, to do one or two of these techniques. A cheap sponge would do it. Natural sponges work better instead of these synthetic ones, though, like the ones from basically any painting store will have a lot of bumps and ridges and things like that, and that's for the particular technique that we'll use, but a regular old sponge will do it fine. Of course, masking tape is a helpful tool in the end. We'll look at the brushes really quick. I've got a few different types here. I've got a fan brush, which does specific kind of techniques. I've got a rough, flat brush. There are different brush types for different reasons. Most artists don't use just one particular brush. They'll use multiple types to complete a certain technique. This is a rough, flat brush. You can tell because it is flat. I've got a soft, pointed brush, or called a round brush, and I got a soft flat brush right here just to kind of work around. I prefer using the soft brushes. Best way to tell is just the feel of the brush. Now, a really good brush, whenever you go to fill the bristles, they snap back into place. If they don't snap back into place, then it's a very flowy kind of brush. Oh, I don't know if flowy is the best descriptive word. It's very loose, and whenever you're working with them, it's almost like a mop. You have to just kind of push around a lot of color in an area. They're not really good for details. If you want to do details, the brush has to snap back into place. Okay. Since I've got all of that basically laid out, one word of warning: acrylic is basically liquid plastic. It's made from petroleum byproducts. It's a fairly new paint medium. It's only come about in the 20th century, so anything before, say, the 1940s, 1930s, you're really not going to see this type of paint. Acrylic paint is very, very new in comparison to many of the other art mediums that we use. Now, this stuff also never comes out of your clothes. I've got 10-year-old acrylic stains. You have to make sure that you do protect your clothes. I'm okay with messing up my shirts and things like that because, well, I'm an art teacher. I can't really get attached to my clothes very well. But I know whenever you're working with this, either wear clothes that are basically sacrificial you like a paint shirt, anything like that, or wear a really good apron, and make sure that your sleeves, of course, are pulled up and that it doesn't get onto your clothes. Because once it's dry, it's there. Like I said before, I've got 10-year-old acrylic stains. They don't go away. This is basically similar to the stuff that they use to put graphics on t-shirts and things like that. It will not come out in the wash. So, to get started, you don't need a lot. You just need a dab. You really don't. You start low, about the size of a dime, before you go, really crazy with it. Now, first technique that we're going to look at is dry brushing. Dry brushing works really well with a brush like this. The reason we do dry brushing first is because we're going to have to wet our brush for everything after this. And, well, it helps just to get the dry one out of the way. So I'm going to take my rough. And notice, I grab a little bit from the edge and I start doing this. This makes sure that it gets worked into my bristles. And then I'm gonna grab it and drag it across. And that's dry brushing. If you want to see how we do it with a soft brush, get my brush clean real quick. It is very important to clean your brushes each time, because if you don't, you'll end up killing your brush. It's not recoverable if you leave your acrylic in here to dry or you don't clean it out well enough. I've had to throw away so many brushes because of this. I'm gonna get my flat right here. This is a nice soft flat, so here's gonna be the difference. Now, see how the soft picks up a lot more color? And when I go to dry brush, it's a little bit smoother. You don't see as many of these jagged lines here whenever you use a soft brush. And that's because it just comes off smoother than it does on a rough brush. The rough brush tends to cling to it a little bit more. And that's one big reason why normally when you do dry brushing, you use a rough brush. Okay, Sgraffito. Oh, we just saw this one. Remember when I said it makes its appearance in other areas? Well, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pick up some water and I'm gonna pick up some color. I'm going to paint a little area, and I want to do it while it's still wet. Acrylic does dry really quickly, and I'm going to take possibly my fork here. Now, you do not have to do this with an actual fork. You can use a plastic fork, you can use plastic knives, you can use a stick, you can use just anything that will make scratches into the paint. And as you can see, that's Sgraffito. Same thing as when we did oil pastel. I told you it'd pop back up again. Okay. Picking up a lot of water with this brush. Okay. Wet on wet is just like it is whenever it's in acrylic. I'm gonna wet it down, pick up some paint, and notice it's acting a lot like watercolor here. I'm gonna get another color out. Let's try this blue. This is a really pretty blue. I'm gonna have to fight with it a little bit. Go. I need a little drop. Then I'll take a little bit of it up. And then lot like how watercolor acts right here. It kind of really shows the versatility of acrylic paints here, whenever you can just treat it like a watercolor or like an oil paint. Okay. Impasto painting. Impasto basically means it's really thick. Palette knives are normally used for impasto style painting, but you can use a brush. You just have to load up your brush with a lot of color. So I'm going to scrape up a lot here. And when this dries, it's very thick. Let me clean that out a little bit. Let's try with this. I like it better. See, you have to load up your brush and just start globbing it on. And you want texture. And that's the big thing. Impasto is about creating texture. It's just painting really thick. You don't water your paint down or anything like that. You just glob it on. But Vincent van Gogh was known for impasto painting. I mean, this square brush would look like a round because he would load it up with so much paint and just glob it onto his canvas. And what will happen is, if you leave it alone like this, it will dry in these ridges and you'll be able to fill all the bumps and ridges over it. That's how impasto painting works. A lot of people who do palette knife paintings where they almost strictly use a palette knife, their paintings will look a lot like that. Okay, sponge style painting. Now I'm going to pick up some color with my sponge. And I'm just gonna dab it. And I'm gonna go here. And I'll press it and dab it down. And a little bit of water to clean it up. I've had some sponges not last very long because of this technique. Now, like I said, this is just a synthetic sponge here. A natural sponge, like the kind that they get off of the ocean floor and that you find in like painting sections and things like that have a lot more texture to them. They'll actually produce way more texture. And notice I'm not cramming my sponge. I wasn't cramming my sponge into it. I was very gently touching it to the paper, just enough that the sponge texture, the little divots and everything, can create an effect. Now, drips and splatters. What's gonna happen is you've got to have a lot of water. See, I'm gonna water this down and I'm gonna place it here. I'm gonna make sure there's plenty of water, and then I'm gonna make sure I tilt it up. Now, I'm gonna try and do this where y'all can see it. You can kind of guide it or smack it, you know, because basically you're just trying to get the water to drip. I wonder if the water dripped right there. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time to master drips and splatters because the tension of the paper wants to hold onto the water. You have to make sure there's a lot of water there. More than enough to make the, let's see, there we go. So not a lot of color in that one. And then you of course just wipe up what you don't want splattered. Now, or dripped. Now splatters, pretty self-explanatory. Much like the toothbrush technique. Now the water is really holding onto this. The surface tension of it's going insane. Let's try this. And let's try this with a little bit more. See, that's a good one to do for if you have a rough brush that flips back. You can just do something like that, and that gives you your splatters. Now, that's not the only kind that you can do. You can get your paint to a certain consistency, like house paint, and just move it around and let it just fall off of your brush. That is a really interesting. Jackson Pollock was an artist that was really known for his drip paintings and splashes and things like that. And he would just basically hold his brush and just move it around. And it would just fall and dribble off of his brush. So that's another technique. This liquid paint is not the best for that. It doesn't have quite the right viscosity to do that, but that is an option. Okay, scumbling. Scumbling, very familiar term. Just means to move it around in circles, doesn't it? So, what you do is, of course, you're going in circles. If you watch like Bob Ross paint and such, you'll see him scumble a lot. And you should see kind of your brush strokes. I need to change out this one water here. That's the thing about working with fluid acrylics is the water gets dirty really, really quickly. So sometimes it's best to get a really big thing of water or make sure that you have a couple waters on hand. I'm going to scumble with this blue here. Scumbling is really good for blending. As you can see, it's starting to blend in with one another with mine. Really good way to kind of get them colors to get together. I'm gonna add a little bit more blue so the blue doesn't get overpowered. So, but basically you're moving in circles to blend or to create a texture. Masking. Now, we've done masking before with watercolor, but I'm going to show y'all another thing you can do. I'm going to put masking here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up some blue, and remember, you want it just like before. You want to go off the tape. You don't want to go back and forth over the tape. You want to pick up your brush and go off of the edges, starting on the tape and going off. Now what we're going to do is we're going to let that dry, and I'm going to show you another thing, thing you can do with it. Okay, soft edge, hard edge. Basically, that's just how you do your edges. So, like if I do a line here, and I start with a line and I just start dragging it out. Basically, that's blending, like fading it out, like a gradient. But it's more of a soft edge. If I want to do a hard edge, I have a lot of water in my brush. I need to get another towel. So for a hard edge, you just go back and forth, and you're just making sure that it's a solid edge. You don't want it to feather out. You just want a hard line. So that would be a hard edge. Now there's many other techniques in acrylic painting, like you can do stippling where you do this. Sponge technique can also do the stippling though. That's one reason why I covered it. But stippling and painting is quite common, especially if you're looking at an impressionist style method. So, like, I can get another color here. And too much water. That's another thing you're gonna have to be wary of, is how much water you're using. You can't really go straight paint all the time because it can really thicken up and you lose a lot of that painterly effect that people are looking for when you paint. You can also just press and drag. Like it goes from wet to dry. There's another toothbrush technique works here too, but as you can see, you can get that same effect just by using your a good like stiff brush. This is almost dry here. Well, acrylics do dry really quickly, so there's some cases where you do have to just kind of work fast. Let me think. You can add media to it as well, such as acrylic gel mediums, iridescent mediums, things like that you can just add to it and it'll change the effects of these. That's another thing that you could do. A lot of watercolor, a lot of watercolor techniques work with it as well. So I'm going to block off that right there. Take a grain. So like on this one, I just added another piece of tape over my dried paint. You can do that with watercolor as well. That was just something that I just kind of neglected to really say. I need to get another towel. But if we let that dry, we'll be able to just peel all that up and you'll see like a layer of blue that was blocked off. Let's see. Oh, another thing. We're gonna scoot that aside. If you need to mix colors, don't do it with your brush. If you only have a brush, that is fine. Just have a brush meant for mixing colors. You'll take a little bit up, go to the side of your palette, take a little bit up, and then go over here, and you can start going like that and mixing the colors together. And you can get a really nice color as long as you mix them correctly. But here's the thing, if you didn't mix a lot, it's better to grab like a palette knife and like this. Didn't grab a whole lot of blue. It'll actually save your brushes, is what it'll do. Because if you start mixing a lot of colors and it gets all the way up in here into the ferrule, which is what this metal part of the brush is called, it'll start messing with the glue and you'll have permanent acrylic kind of put all the way up in here. You don't really want to mix your paints with your brush. It's way better to do it with a palette knife, a plastic knife at home, like like from those like plastic cutlery sets, you know, that you get whenever you have like a barbecue or something like that. That is way better to mix your paint than to use a brush. Doing like little amounts is fine, but if you're doing a large amount, which most of the time you need to, don't use your brush. It will ruin your brushes. The best thing I can say is that I lost my train of thought. Oh my goodness. Well, many of my students know me. Know they lose my train of thought a lot. So, the best thing I can say for mixing paint is that when you do need to mix a color, if you need a lot of it, you need to mix more than what you need, because you will almost never be able to get the exact ratio again. Oh, and when you go to clean your brushes, you have to kind of reshape them and then make sure they're sticking up or if they're in like some kind of vise holding down. Oh, I'm getting a little bit off subject, off of a tangent, but brush care. Once you cleaned out your brushes, you shape the tip again, and then the best way, the ideal way, is to have your brush like this, drying like this with nothing affecting the tip here, because you don't want the water running into the ferrule. But most of the time we have to do like this, which is not the best for the brush because the water will drip down into here and loosen the glue, which makes a lot of hairs come out. Hairs will come out in brushes. Even the most expensive brushes, sometimes hair will fall out of them. You just gotta pick it away once it's dry and it'll be fine, or pick it away while it's still wet with like a palette knife or something like that. But hairs happen. Now, like I said, the best way to dry a brush is like this. One way I'll suggest that you can do it is you can kind of have a brush on the edge of something with something propping it up here. And as long as the tip is not touching the ground like this, it's not going to affect the brush. If you allow a brush to dry bristles down, so say I let it dry like this, it will retain this shape. And it is dang near impossible to get it back into the correct shape. So please make sure you take care of your brushes, because sometimes they are an investment. These right here that I've got were a little pricey, so I have to make sure that they're really well taken care of. Oh, one brush I didn't use. I didn't use the fan brush. Show you how that goes. So if you do have a fan brush, you just grab from the edge, and it's for stippling basically. You can use it to make trees, basically. That's what Bob Ross did. He used a fan brush for trees and the dappled effects. And notice I'm not doing the whole brush. I can do the whole brush, but it makes this effect. And it acts like a regular one. It's better just to, and I was dry brushing with that. It's better just to use a corner. Now my brush, whenever it gets wet, likes to stick together like this. I have to adjust it. It's not the best or most expensive brush, but you just do an end and you do like that, and it gives you a stippling effect. Forgot to mention that. So, I know this video was all over the place. We can be a little bit casual about our learning. If you did feel like you missed something or you just need clarification, you can always just contact me on Google Classroom, or you can just flat out just repeat the video to see maybe I said it and you just had to look it over a couple more times, or if you just gotta just send me an email. I can do that. So this is almost dry right here. There's still some areas where it's wet, but I'm gonna peel up the tape here. Now you do know that I overlapped it here. Oh, with watercolor, not watercolor, with acrylic paint. I will mention, depending on how thick you do this, it's best to pull up the masking tape when the paint's still wet. It's because of how acrylic dries, it can actually, instead of your just the paint ripping up the paper, unlike in watercolor, whenever we peel up the tape, sometimes it rips the paper. Well, sometimes with acrylic, because of its properties, when you peel it up, it might peel up the acrylic too, because acrylic's like liquid plastic. So, as you notice, when I peel up this, I peeled up this first tape. Now I'm peeling up this second layer, and look there. I've got some of it blocked off, and what was under the tape is blocked off right there. So that's just another little trick you can use. So there are like dozens of other techniques. I haven't even begun to scratch the surface of how this would be. So explore, look up the techniques and things like that. You'll come across these a lot. These are just the more common ones. And so I'll see y'all next time.